So the line chart for renewable energy generation is almost done. We just need to do a few things to clean it up and make sure the text looks great. In fact, let's start with the dates or the years that appear across the bottom of the chart. If I press Command Y or Control Y, this takes me to outline mode. I can now see all the dates that appear across the bottom. I want to select these, so with my direct selection tool, I can hold down my Option key, and again, that activates the group selection functionality. I can click once on 2011, and then I'm going to click again. Now, if you click too fast, what might happen is Illustrator will toggle to the text tool. If that happens, just switch back to your direct selection tool, and then once again, just click, pause for a second, and then click again. That will select this entire group here of all these numbers. Now I'm going to press Command Y or Control Y to go back into my preview mode, and I'm going to press Command T or Control T to bring up my character panel. Now I want to set this typeface to Chaparral Pro, but I want to use regular, and I want to change the point size here to 11 1/4. 11 1/4 points. I'll hit the Tab key here, and the leading here should really be set to auto as well. I'll make sure that the tracking is set to 0. I want it to be easy to read. And I'm also going to click on this little triangle button here to expand the character panel all the way, because I see that right now it's set to a superscript. So I want to turn that toggle off. So now it appears as regular characters. And it's simply set this way because the last time that I set something, it had those settings, so it's simply picking it up from last time. And finally, I want to change the color of the text to this renewable green color, which is inside of the energy color group. It's the second one here called renewable. And now I've styled the text the way that I want to for the years that appear across the bottom. Let me go ahead now and click on a blank area to deselect this. And I really have to style some things further, and there are also parts of this chart that I really don't need right now. So for example, I'm going to close the character panel here for just a moment. And I really don't need to have these lines appear for the axes because I've kind of defined my own here in the background within the art of my infographic. So all I really want are the data series lines and the circles. I want the years across the bottom, and soon I'm going to modify these labels as well. So in order to modify these elements or remove them basically, I can do one of two things. I can either select them and then set their fill and stroke to none, which means they just won't be visible but they're there. But in doing so, it allows me to keep my graph in an active state. I wouldn't have to ungroup my graph, and that way, if at any point I needed to modify the data, I can do so. But I don't have any intention here of modifying the data, and later on in our project, I'm going to want to put each of these data series in their own layers so I can choose to hide and show them at will. So really, I am going to ungroup this graph, and that way work with it as regular artwork. So I'm going to switch to my selection tool and click just on really anything inside of the chart to select the entire group. And I'm now going to go to the Object menu and choose to ungroup. Now Illustrator is going to give me a warning saying that I currently have a graph selected, and if I now go ahead and I ungroup this, I'm not going to be able to modify the data anymore, which is totally fine because I know what I'm doing here. I'm going to click Yes, and now I basically have a group, but it's not a graph. So now I'm going to deselect this for a moment. I'm going to go back to my direct selection tool. I'm going to start getting rid of some of these elements. Now there's some text here along the side, but remember I've created my own here, so I don't really need this anymore. I'm going to hold down my Option key, click once on the text, pause for just a second, and then click again, and that it's now going to select all the elements inside of that group. I'm going to press Delete. We don't need that anymore. I'm now going to hold down my Option key, click once on this line right here to select it, and then click a second time to select all the tick marks. And again, press Delete because we don't need that part of the chart. Let's come over here to this side. We don't need these lines either. So again, Option, click on the bottom line, and then Option, click again to select all the tick marks, and then delete that group. Finally, I have these elements here on the right side. Now, I really don't need these lines whatsoever, so I'm going to hold down my Option key, and I'm going to marquee select all of them at once. Click over here, and drag straight down. I just want to make sure that I'm basically overlapping both the lines and the circles. Release the mouse so they all become selected. I just want to make sure I'm not going far enough to the right where the text is also selected because I don't want to delete the text. So I just now have the lines and the circles selected, and I'll hit delete for that as well. And now I'm going to go ahead and style this text. I'm going to Option, click and drag down here to select all of these 5 text elements. Press Command T, and let's modify some of the settings. Now, first of all, it's currently set to the superscript. Let's go ahead and turn that toggle off. In this case, I do want it to stay Chaparral Pro as bold, but I'm going to set the point size to 16 points. I'll hit the Tab key, and I'll click on this little triangle here to bring the pop-up menu to set the leading to auto. I also want the tracking to be set to 0, and I'll close the character panel. Now, to make it a little bit more easier to read and identify, I would like to match the color of the text with the color of each of the data series. So for example, for hydropower, I'm just simply going to use my direct selection tool here and select that text element and change its color and go to the renewable energy group and choose hydropower. Let's do the same thing here for wind. Select wind, choose the wind color, select biomass, change it to the biomass color. Let's do the same for geothermal. And finally for the solar PV as well. Now what I'd like to do is align the text here so that it kind of matches up where these little circles are. So I'm going to make sure that my direct selection tool is currently selected. And let's go ahead and deselect so that nothing is selected here. I'm going to hold down my Option key and click once, pause for a second, and then click again because all of these text elements are within the same group. And I'm simply going to drag it over here so that it is closer to where these dots actually are. But they're out of order, so I'm going to deselect and then just simply take solar PV, click and drag. I'm going to hold the Shift key down and drag it down to about here. Let's click, drag with the Shift key down here. I'm going to click and drag on hydropower and drag that all the way up over here. Click, drag, and then hold the Shift key down to bring biomass here. By the way, if I keep the Shift key down and now I click on wind, I'm going to get both biomass and wind selected. I don't want that to happen. So I'm always going to click first, and then as I start to drag, I'm now going to go ahead and hold down the Shift key, and that will constrain movement to either vertical or horizontal. And now I have put that into position as well. Of course, you can select these and just kind of nudge them into position using the arrow keys as needed. But we've now been able to successfully style the chart the way that we want it to appear in our final infographic. Now, the one thing that I want to make sure that we're doing also is ensuring that our layer structure is correct. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag our layers panel out here. Let me make it a little bit narrower so we can actually see something that's going on here in our document. And I'm going to use my selection tool to click and drag across all the elements that we just created here so they all become selected. Now you'll notice that I already have a layer here called renewable energy. So I want to move all the elements that are currently selected now into that layer. And I'm going to look at the chart layer at the top here, where I see this small little square that represents all the elements selected. And I'm going to use that square to move the artwork into the layer that I want, which is the renewable energy layer, which by the way is currently locked. So let me first choose to unlock it. Grab the little square, drag it into the renewable energy layer, release the mouse, and then I'll choose to lock that layer again. Let's move the layers panel back into where it was before, right here. And we've completed this chart. Let's go ahead and save our work. I'm going to go to the File menu and choose Save As. We want to create a copy here. Change 04 to 05. Hit Save. Hit OK. And our infographic is really now starting to take shape. Now, as I was creating the sketches originally for this infographic, I realized how large of a gap there was between hydropower and wind. So rather than just have an empty space here, I thought I would take some extra data that helps us better understand not only how renewable energy is being used in the United States, but how does that compare with global use of renewable energy as well. So in the next movie, we're going to focus on adding a table that adds that information in this blank area that appears at this part of the infographic.